Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. I feel like I just did one of these, but I have been reading like crazy recently, so it's time for another reading roundup. In these videos, I talk about the books that I've been reading recently, and I've got another big stack in front of me. Now, some of these are books that I read, I took the whole month of May to read, and others are just ones that I've read recently. So let's just dive right in. For the Mysterious Mayhem readathon hosted by Skeleton Key, I read The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I had picked this up in a little free library, wanting to give Ruth Ware another shot. I read one of her books one by one, and I wasn't a huge fan, but I thought that I'd give her another shot. She's always described as being the modern Agatha Christie, and her plots sound interesting. I think my problem comes in the execution. I am just not really a fan of Ruth Ware. So this one is about a nanny in Scotland. She goes from England to Scotland to become a nanny for this family who live in a remote part of Scotland. And there are 4 children, the oldest of which is away at boarding school when she starts, so she's never even met the oldest child. And then, so she goes to be a live-in nanny, and then the parents immediately leave on a business trip. Like, she doesn't even get one full day with the parents there. They immediately leave on a business trip, which I thought was insane. That wouldn't have been acceptable to me. I've been a nanny. I've never been a live-in nanny, but I have been a nanny, and I think that was one of the problems that I had with this book, was there was too many things that happened that were unbelievable for how a nanny would or should behave with the kids in her care. And then of course weird things start happening, and then a child dies. You know this from the very beginning because this is an epistolary novel. The main character, I've already forgotten her name, Rowan, is in jail right from the beginning, so you know right away that she's been arrested for killing a child in her care, and she is writing a letter to her lawyer. Now, I was excited about that because I thought, oh, I like epistolary novels. So she wrote one letter that was of decent size, and then she continued, and with a second letter, she wrote out her story. Now, she was writing out her story in order to kind of grab the interest of this lawyer so that this lawyer would become her lawyer. And the problem that I had with that was the length of this letter was completely unbelievable, because it was pretty much the length of this whole book. There's a few pages at the beginning and a few pages at the end that aren't part of the letter, but one letter is the length of this book. I just couldn't believe it. Nobody would write a letter that long. I mean, unless there were 1 or 2 situations where I could see that possibly happening, but I just didn't buy it. If the author had, just decided to tell this story, and that she wrote the first letter, and then the lawyer came to see her, and then the rest of it was her telling the lawyer her story, that would be more believable. So yeah, I didn't go for that. I also didn't enjoy the amount of swearing in this book. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of swearing in my novels. And then the other thing is, so she's writing this letter from jail, and we're not entirely sure what she has with her, but she includes the full advert that she responded to get this job. Okay? And then at another point, she included the full email that she received from the person who was going to hire her. This entire page and here. Are we supposed to believe that she remembered that verbatim? I mean, so I just didn't buy the setup for this book. Yeah, so ultimately in the end, this wasn't for me, and I've now just, I'm just realized Ruth Ware is not the author for me. So I will be returning this to a little free library. Then I read some more short stories in my Oscar Wilde short story collection. I've been reading these with Donna from Studio in the Library, and it has been so much fun to buddy read these short stories with her. She has such great comments to make about the stories. I almost love reading her comments as much as I love reading the books. She is just so thoughtful, and she brings things up that I wouldn't have thought about myself. So this month in May, we read A House of Pomegranates. So let me just go there so I can tell you specifically which short stories we read. All right. So A House of Pomegranates is a short story collection which includes The Young King, The Birth of the Infanta, The Fisherman and His Soul, and The Star Child. All of these, again, were fairy tales, but reading through them, I was reminded again that Oscar Wilde, what are called his fairy tales, aren't actually fairy tales. I think it would be better for everybody if they were called fables. I don't know. I did enjoy them. He is an amazing writer, and I just think that it's beautiful. The last story, The Star Child, I was thinking, okay, this is actually going to be a fairy tale, because it started with the words once upon a time, which is, you know, kind of all fairy tales start like that. And a child who is found and who grows up, and just the way that the story was progressing, I thought, okay, here we have it, here's a fairy tale. But then the very last paragraph was kind of shocking. It did not end like fairy tales normally end, and so again, I don't think you could even say the one that starts with once upon a time is actually a fairy tale. But I love these short stories, and I really have been loving reading them with Donna. And so we're continuing on. We're almost finished. In June, we're going to read, let me see, The Portrait of Mr. W.H. and The Ballad of Reading Jail, and then we will have completed this collection. So that's very exciting. For the Tutor Along, I read Katherine of Aragon, The True Queen by Alison Weir. This was the first book for the Tutor Along, and we have the months of May and June to read it, but I ended up reading it in May, and I enjoyed this. It's very interesting when you write historical fiction about an actual person and actual events. It's a fine line to tread, I think, between staying true to history and writing an engaging, interesting story. And I think Alison Weir does it pretty well. It's hard to write an engaging story where everybody knows what happens. And that's the one thing that I found in this was, you know, that I was like, I know how this ends. So one thing, I thought it was a tad long, but I did enjoy it. And what I really enjoyed was how focused she remained on Katherine. You were in Katherine's mind the entire time, and she really did a good job of humanizing this historical person. So, you know, we got her thoughts and her feelings, her joys and her struggles, and that's the part that I did really enjoy. I really do like Alison Weir's writing style, and so I am excited to continue on with the series. The next one, of course, will be Anne Boleyn. And then I also read The Constable of the Tower by William Harrison Ainsworth. This is a Victorian novel. It is called An Historical Romance. I'm trying to open this for you. My poor copy is falling apart. I have no idea how old this book is. I believe that it was written in 1861, and it starts with the death of Henry VIII and how his will was followed, and then his son Edward gains the throne. But of course, because he's so young, I don't know, I think he's 10 or 11, he needs to have a Lord Protector. And so really the story is about the two Seymour brothers, Thomas Seymour and then his brother, who becomes the Lord Protector. I found it interesting that it was called The Constable of the Tower, because he is a character in here. At the time, the Constable of the Tower was Sir John Gage, and I did really like him as a character, but we didn't actually see a lot of him. I think it's interesting to read a historical book, a historical fiction written during the Victorian time period, you get a really good view of their understanding of history and how it played out. So this takes place in a prologue and then 4 books. And like I said, it's primarily about the 2 Seymour brothers and their struggle for power, to kind of be the power behind the throne. I have to say though, I loved it. This is now the 3rd Ainsworth book that I have read, and I just love it. Historical romances that were of this type that were written at that time period aren't for everybody, and I get that, but I am here for it. I love it. There is a huge amount of melodrama, and I'm totally fine with that. I just really enjoyed it, and so I want to read for you from the first paragraph. The terrible reign of Henry VIII drew to a close. The curtain was about to descend upon one of the most tremendous dramas ever enacted in real life, a drama which those who witnessed it beheld with wonder and awe. The sun of royalty, which had scorched all it fell upon by the fierceness of its midday beams, was fast sinking into seas lighted up by lurid fires and deeply stained by blood. So you know from the first paragraph what you're getting. This is hugely melodramatic, and I loved it. So I'm really hoping that I can find more of Ainsworth's books. He's hard to find. He is an author that has fallen out of favor in our modern day world, but I really hope I find more of his books, because man, do I really enjoy them. Okay, and then I read a historical mystery, Evil in Emeralds, by A.M. Stuart. This is the 3rd in her Harriet Gordon series, and I really like this series. It's set in Singapore in 1910, and so it's a great setting and a great time period. Harriet, in the first book, kind of goes to Singapore. She's escaping some things in London. She was a suffragette for a while and had been arrested and put in Holloway prison, and she was force-fed. And so she kind of just needs to escape and recuperate. And so she goes to Singapore, where her brother runs a school for boys. And so she lives with her brother and helps him at the school. In this book, I don't want to tell you too much because it's the 3rd one in the series, but Harriet has joined the Singapore Amateur Dramatic and Music Society, and their latest production is The Pirates of Penzance. And one of the actors, their leading man, is found dead in a fire at their Amateur Dramatic Society's house building. And so the investigation goes from there. The police officer in this case is Robert Curran. I really like him as a character. He's a good person and kind of living in a difficult time period to try and be a good person and place in the world. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I'm hoping that there are more coming out from that series. And then also for the Mysterious Mayhem readathon, I read The Bone Peddler by Sylvian Hamilton. Now, this has been on my shelf for a while, and I was excited because it fit the prompts perfectly for Mysterious Mayhem, and I'm glad that I read it. It's a historical mystery set in 1209, and it's really mostly about holy relics. And our main character is Sir Richard Strachan. He was a knight on the Crusades, and now he is back in England, and he basically buys and sells relics or finds them for buyers. So this is huge business in the medieval time period. People believed that these relics had powers, that they would heal you, that they would keep you safe. And so especially monasteries and abbeys were always trying to get their hands on relics because it would draw in people to their abbey. And so Richard is asked by the prioress of Holystone to solve a mystery, and then the story goes on from there. And I did enjoy it, but it had a little more of the other world than I kind of prefer in my stories. So the other side of the belief system at this time, that holy relics will protect you, the other side of it is that these people also believed in magic and fairies and evil and demons. So like, you know, the reward of heaven and the threat of hell was very, very real to the people in the medieval time period. And so you get people who want relics to protect them, but on the other hand, you get people who think that they can summon demons and therefore gain power. And there was a little more of that than I prefer in my historical mysteries, although I have to say it was, I mean, it's a belief system that is accurate to the time period. All right, and I just had to read the first sentence for you because it's fantastic. In the crypt of the Abbey Church at Hallowdene, the monks were boiling their bishop. So that is The Bone Peddler by Sylvian Hamilton. And then I read Murder at Longbourn by Tracy Kiely. This is, I would say it's probably a cozy mystery. It's set in Cape Cod, so of course I love that because it gives me all the feels of Murder, She Wrote. But what I loved about this one is the connection to Jane Austen. You have a main character who adores Jane Austen, specifically Pride and Prejudice. And so our main character is Elizabeth Parker. And for New Year's Eve celebrations, she goes to stay with her Aunt Winnie at her new bed and breakfast in Cape Cod. And so for New Year's Eve, she is hosting basically a murder mystery party. She's hired a group of actors who will come in, you know, and there will be a murder, and then the guests get to try and solve the murder. So all of this is great. I'm loving it. What I adored about this is the sheer amount of Jane Austen isms and the love of Jane Austen that flowed through this book. First of all, this bed and breakfast is called the Inn at Longbourn. Isn't that fantastic? So many of the character names have connections to Jane Austen. So her great Aunt Winnie, her name is Mrs. Reynolds. And of course, Mrs. Reynolds is the housekeeper in Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy's housekeeper. The main character is Elizabeth. So of course, there's that connection to Pride and Prejudice. Now and she has a sister called Kit. Then this one I thought was, you know, kind of a sneaky way to get in even more Jane Austen appreciation. Elizabeth's roommate is called Bridget, and Bridget's fiance is called Colin. And I just thought that was so clever because, of course, Bridget Jones is a book and a movie that is, you know, sort of loosely based on Pride and Prejudice. And the man in the movie, Darcy in the movie, is played by Colin Firth. So I don't think I'm stretching it to think that that was totally on purpose. There are tons of quotes from Pride and Prejudice throughout the book. Most of them from Elizabeth herself. She quotes the book all the time. And of course, it can be pretty annoying to the people that she is quoting to, but it is very entertaining for the reader. Here is an example. So she has arrived at the bed and breakfast and her Aunt Winnie is showing her the room that she will be staying at. "What a lovely room," I cried. "It's perfect." As Aunt Winnie peered at her reflection in the mirror, patting an errant curl into place, I opened the closet to hang up my coat. Teasingly, I stood back and said, "What? No shelves in the closet? I'm all astonishment." Laughing, Aunt Winnie turned away from the mirror. "Don't be a smartass, but I am glad you like it." So that's perfect. And then one more, just to give you another example. Detective Stuart didn't respond. Instead, he stared at me. I wish I could say my courage rises with every attempt to intimidate me, but I can't. Instead, my reaction is Pavlovian. My palms begin to sweat and all the moisture evaporates from my mouth. So yeah, that was very entertaining. I also really enjoyed that there was references to other books as well. There was references to Gilbert Blythe from Anne of Green Gables, Amelia Peabody from the Amelia Peabody series by Elizabeth Peters, just to name a few. And also, I loved it so much, the cat at the inn is named Lady Katherine. So this wasn't maybe the best mystery I ever read, but I really enjoyed all the Jane Austen references, so I'm definitely going to continue read the next one in the series. And then finally, I read a book. I wasn't expecting it to be on this list, but I ended up reading it in one day, and that's The Devil's Advocate by Steve Cavanagh. This is the next up for me in the Eddie Flynn series. I love this series so much. This one was slightly different, however, because Eddie gets sent to Alabama to be the lawyer for a young black man who is on trial for murdering a white girl. And his lawyer is missing. And so Eddie gets like whatever he needs for his license to practice out of state, and he goes down. But what's great is he's got his team with him. Harry goes with him, and his new partner and investigator. And this is classic Steve Cavanagh. It was fast paced and interesting, and you were never entirely sure who's who. And what they were really investigating was the lawyer who was prosecuting this case, because he had far too many of his cases ended up being death penalty cases, and so many of them actually went to execution. And so it seemed a little bit, something seemed off there, and they weren't wrong. I'm not going to say too much more. I don't want to ruin it, but I do really enjoy this series. And The Devil's Advocate, I liked that they moved out of New York and that it was set in a different location, so they were very much fish out of water. They were not welcomed in this community, and so they had even more things were against them than normal in an Eddie Flynn book. So there you have it. That's what I've been reading recently. Have you read any of these books? I would love to chat with you about them in the comment section down below. And I will see you for another video soon. Bye.